Hello everyone. Today, we're going to talk about a very important and heartbreaking part of history, Palestine and the events of 1948, known as the Nakba. We'll also look at how this tragedy continues to affect Palestinians today. In 1948, over 500,000 Palestinians were forced to leave their homes. This wasn't just people moving, it was a catastrophe. Families were driven out by violence and fear, leaving behind everything they knew. Today, Palestinians still face hardships. Many live under Israeli military occupation, dealing with daily restrictions and the loss of their land to settlements. The situation in Gaza is especially dire. People are facing starvation because aid can't get through. The destruction is massive, and the death toll is high. Many international experts are even calling it genocide. This ongoing crisis shows how the pain from 1948 isn't just history, it's still very real for Palestinians today. Today, we're going to talk about a very important and heartbreaking part of history that still affects millions of people today. We'll be discussing Palestine, its people, and the tragic events of 1948 known as the Nakba, which means catastrophe in Arabic. We'll also explore how the suffering that began then continues to this very day. Before we dive into the events of 1948, let's take a moment to understand what Palestine was like before that fateful year. Palestine was a land where people of different faiths, Muslims, Christians, and Jews, lived side by side, sharing their lives and cultures. It was a diverse and vibrant place, with a rich history stretching back thousands of years. However, things began to change in the early 20th century. More and more Jewish people, many fleeing persecution in Europe, began moving to Palestine. This movement was driven by a political ideology called Zionism, which aimed to create a Jewish homeland in the region. While some saw this as a way to escape oppression, it created tension with the existing Palestinian population. As the number of Jewish immigrants grew, conflicts arose over land and resources. The situation became increasingly complex, with both Palestinians and Jewish settlers feeling they had a right to the land. This tension eventually led to the United Nations proposing a plan in 1947 to divide Palestine into two separate states, one for Jews and one for Arabs. This brings us to the Nakba, the catastrophe that befell the Palestinian people in 1948. On May 14th of that year, the State of Israel was declared, and almost immediately, a full-scale war broke out. What followed was a disaster for Palestinians that would change the course of their history forever. During the Nakba, over 750,000 Palestinians, more than half of the entire Palestinian population at the time, were forcibly expelled from their homes and lands. This wasn't a peaceful transition or a voluntary migration. It was a violent upheaval that tore families apart and destroyed entire communities. Villages were emptied, and in many cases, completely destroyed. People fled in fear, often with nothing but the clothes on their backs. Many believed they would return to their homes in a matter of days or weeks. Tragically, that return never came. The expulsion of Palestinians wasn't just about people leaving their homes. It was about the erasure of an entire way of life. Centuries-old olive groves were uprooted, ancient buildings were demolished, and the very landscape of Palestine was altered. For those who were forced out, it wasn't just the loss of property, it was the loss of their heritage, their livelihoods, and their sense of belonging. But the story of Palestinian suffering didn't end in 1948. In fact, for many, it was just the beginning of a long and painful journey that continues to this day. The Nakba set the stage for decades of conflict, displacement, and oppression that still shape the lives of Palestinians today. After 1948, many Palestinians found themselves living as refugees in neighboring countries like Lebanon, Syria, and Jordan. Others remained within what became Israel, but as second-class citizens, and still others ended up in the West Bank and Gaza Strip, areas that would later come under Israeli military occupation. This brings us to the next crucial part of our discussion, the ongoing occupation and land seizure that Palestinians continue to face. Following the 1967 war, Israel occupied the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and the Gaza Strip. This occupation, which continues today, has had a profound impact on every aspect of Palestinian life. Under occupation, Palestinians face a complex system of control and restrictions. In the West Bank, this includes checkpoints that limit movement, a separation wall that cuts through Palestinian land, and a network of Israeli-only roads that fragment Palestinian communities. In East Jerusalem, Palestinians face the constant threat of home demolitions and revocation of their residency rights. Perhaps one of the most visible and contentious aspects of the occupation is the ongoing expansion of Israeli settlements in the West Bank and East Jerusalem. These settlements, considered illegal under international law, continue to be built on Palestinian land. As settlements grow, more Palestinian land is confiscated, olive groves are destroyed, and Palestinian communities are further isolated and fragmented. The situation in Gaza is particularly dire. Since 2007, Gaza has been under a strict blockade imposed by Israel and Egypt. This tiny strip of land, home to over 2 million Palestinians, has been described as the world's largest open-air prison. The blockade severely restricts the movement of people and goods, crippling Gaza's economy and making daily life a constant struggle. But even these ongoing hardships pale in comparison to the current crisis unfolding in Gaza. As we speak, Palestinians in Gaza are facing what many are calling a humanitarian catastrophe of unprecedented proportions. The situation has deteriorated to such an extent that there are now serious accusations of genocide being leveled against Israel by various international bodies and experts. The current crisis began in October 2023, following an attack by Hamas on Israel. In response, Israel launched a massive military campaign against Gaza. The consequences have been devastating. Thousands of Palestinians, including a shocking number of children, have been killed. Entire neighborhoods have been reduced to rubble. Critical infrastructure, hospitals, schools, power plants, has been destroyed. But perhaps the most alarming aspect of the current crisis is the widespread starvation facing Gaza's population. The United Nations and other aid organizations have warned that Gaza is on the brink of famine. The flow of humanitarian aid into Gaza has been severely restricted, leaving people without access to food, clean water, and essential medicines. This starvation is not just a byproduct of the conflict. Many argue it's being used as a weapon of war. The deliberate blocking of aid, the destruction of farmland and food production facilities, and the targeting of water infrastructure have all contributed to this dire situation. It's a level of suffering that's hard for most of us to even imagine. The scale of destruction in Gaza is staggering. Satellite images show entire areas of Gaza City and other urban centers completely leveled. Homes, businesses, and public buildings that took generations to build have been destroyed in a matter of weeks. The United Nations estimates that over half of Gaza's buildings have been damaged or destroyed. This destruction goes beyond just physical infrastructure. It's the destruction of lives, of futures, of an entire society. Children who have survived the bombing are now facing the long-term effects of trauma, malnutrition, and disrupted education. Families who have lost everything are wondering if they'll ever be able to rebuild their lives. The accusations of genocide are not made lightly. They come from a place of deep concern over the scale and nature of the violence being inflicted on Gaza's civilian population, the deliberate targeting of civilian infrastructure, the use of starvation as a weapon, and statements from some Israeli officials suggesting intent to destroy Palestinian society have all contributed to these accusations. As we conclude this discussion, it's important to remember that what we're talking about isn't just history or politics. It's about real people, real lives, and real suffering. From the Nakba of 1948 to the ongoing occupation and the current crisis in Gaza, Palestinians have endured decades of displacement, oppression, and violence. The situation in Palestine today, the direct continuation of the tragedy that began in 1948. The Nakba wasn't a one-time event. It is an ongoing process of dispossession and erasure that continues to this day. Understanding this history is crucial if we hope to make sense of the current crisis and work towards a just and peaceful resolution. As we witness the unfolding tragedy in Gaza and the continued suffering of Palestinians under occupation, we must ask ourselves, what role do we play in this story? How can we use our voices, our votes, and our actions to support justice and human rights for all people in this region? These are difficult questions, but they're questions we must grapple with, because until there is justice for Palestinians, until their rights are respected and their dignity is restored, there can be no lasting peace in the region. Thank you for listening to this important story, and I encourage you to continue learning and engaging with this crucial issue.